Yeah, I heard you say in an interview once that, acting in Canada is a little bit like being in a witness protection program, which made me chuckle. And it took me back for a second because I thought,
Uh, well, I'm only partly kidding. Canada is a small country. We service American television. We shoot a lot of American television up here, but we do also our own shows. But Canadians are not very. I mean, their stars are the big U.S. stars just as much as in the U.S. So, in Canada, I mean, I can walk around on the street and get on the streetcar and the subway, and nobody notices. It's a much more quote unquote normal lifestyle, I suppose.
it's true. It's true. But thankfully, with now with the streaming services and with NBC picking up another show that you're in, Transplant, finally we're starting to get to see some of the wonderful work that's being done. I discovered Schitt's Creek the same way. I wouldn't have
Right.
heard about it unless it was for streaming services, and thank God because I love that show. Uh,
Well, so much of I would say in the last 2-3 years, things have changed tremendously in terms of uh, um, public profile because of streaming. I have because Kim's Convenience gets shown on streaming services around the world now on Netflix.
yeah,
My cousins in India get to see me. They never used to see me. They heard that I worked in television in Canada, but they've never seen anything I've done for 30 years. Now they're watching Kim's Convenience shortly after it's on in Canada, and I get fan tweets from Malaysia and Australia, and this is a whole new thing for somebody working out of Canada.
it's interesting again because we're so close. I'm in the U.S., so I think I know Canada, and obviously I didn't know very much. I know lots of Canadian actors who obviously I know because they've been in all of the American productions. I know things are shot in Canada. I tried to submit myself for some of those things, and I quickly realized that I couldn't because I don't live in Ottawa. I don't live in Toronto. I am not Canadian, and I think you have some quotas of Canadian. Certain number of Canadian actors have to be present in every production. Is that true?
Well, no, it doesn't work quite like that. It
Okay.
depends on the production. For instance, I'm in the new upcoming season of a show called The Expanse, which is a big science fiction show on
Yeah, Amazon.
Amazon,
Yeah.
and they can hire anybody they want
Hmm.
because they're basically shooting in Canada because they want to shoot in Canada, but they're not using any Canadian tax incentives or that kind of thing.
I
If you
see.
use if you use that, if you use the tax credits and the Canadian tax incentives and that kind of stuff, then you do have to have a certain amount of money that is spent on Canadian production and Canadian talent and Canadian. But if you don't, if you just come here and have your production, you can hire anybody you want. And then of course Canadian content has to be strictly Canadian, but they're also getting incentives and things from in order to qualify for Canadian content. They get tax credits as a result. So yeah, it all depends on where the money comes from.
Good, but I think at least there's a way or a mechanism to get more Canadian actors into all of these productions, which is great.
Well, I mean, Canadians would argue that the best way for a Canadian to get cast in Canada is to move to LA, because that's often that's often what happens. Is that, well, I mean, most of my colleagues have moved to Los Angeles and then get better parts in the Canadian in shooting in Canada. But for American shows and even Canadian shows, I mean, that's just the reality of the business. Is that the perception is, if you're any good, you'd be in LA. And so Canadian resident performers have all, I mean, you asked why,
Yeah,
it's a witness protection program. Well, that's why. The perception, and I'm just being very honest with you, the
thank you.
perception of, by both American or U.S. primetime and Canadian casting, is that, the real talent is in LA. And if they can't afford to bring somebody from LA, then they'll look at the Canadian talent. I mean, I think there are lots of exceptions to that rule in terms of casting directors in both countries who don't believe that.
Yeah.
But as a kind of stereotype, that we've been fighting that, and I'm a member of the union here too, the acting union. In the U.S., it's called SAG, Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA. In Canada, it's called ACTRA, and it's one of our issues, which is, why do people have to move to LA to get cast in Canada? But there is a reality to that perception that we've been facing most of my professional life anyway.
It's strange. It echoes a little bit of what we have in Chicago. I'm in Chicago, so we have a lot of shows that are done in Chicago. A lot of Dick Wolf shows.
Right, and it's the same thing. You probably have to move to LA to get cast in a show in Chicago.
Yeah, LA or New York. Otherwise,
right.
The types of roles that we're able to get here are,
it'll be the one-line part that is not worth flying somebody in for.
Yeah.
And and that it doesn't really matter, and that kind of thing. So I think that the struggles that Chicago actors face in that regard are equivalent to what we face. It may be a different level because you're just dealing with Chicago shot shows. We're dealing with everything that's shot in Canada, but I think the issue is the same.
Well, I'm hoping with the streaming services and more things being shown right now, that'll change, because I think that's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, Chicago's got one of the great acting communities in North America.
Yeah.
A lot of whom work only on stage, and outside Chicago, nobody's heard of them.
Yep.
And these are people who could, go on to Broadway or wherever without any, I went to drama school in the States. I did my undergraduate degree in theater at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. And one of the guys I went to school with, it was, I'm old, and he was a graduate student. I was an undergraduate, but we were taking the same directing class together. And he said, yeah, these friends of mine and I started a theater company in Chicago last summer, and then I decided to take a year off to do my graduate degree. I said, oh yeah, what's the name of the company? It's called Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and all of those people, we don't know about them. I mean, unless they become John Malkovich. So I think that's the reality of an arts career outside LA and New York. You're going to be perceived as, like I said, witness protection program.